What happens when a royal guest walks onto a talk show expecting deference, but instead gets the unfiltered fire of a host who refuses to bend? That was the scene on ITV's Loose Women the day Prince Harry took his seat, expecting a routine conversation about his charitable projects, only to discover Denise Welch waiting with sharpened questions and zero patience for royal privilege. From the very moment Harry entered the studio, something felt different. He carried himself with that practiced blend of royal posture and California casual, tailored suit, open collar, a carefully rehearsed smile. His entourage lingered just off stage, confident that their prince would charm his way through yet another appearance. But on the set itself, the panelists exchanged glances. Christine Lampard looked cautious, Nadia Sawalha amused, and Kay Adams ever the diplomat. Denise, however, leaned forward in her chair, eyes locked on the royal guest like a hawk circling prey. "Prince Harry, thank you for joining us," she said, her voice level but edged with the unmistakable tone that longtime viewers recognized. She was in no mood for platitudes. Harry smiled politely. "Thank you for having me, Denise. It's great to be here." The opening was smooth enough, but the tension was already visible. Harry adjusted his tie. Denise did not return his smile. "Is it, though?" she asked bluntly. "Because from what I've read, you've got a lot to say about the British media. And, well, newsflash, we are the British media." The audience chuckled nervously. Harry's smile flickered. "I think it's important to have honest conversations about how stories are covered," he replied carefully. "Honest conversations," Denise repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "So when you say the British press has treated you unfairly, are you including programs like this one? Because we're British media too, aren't we?" Christine jumped in quickly, trying to soften the blow. "What Denise means is perhaps you could share your perspective on media coverage, Harry, so our viewers can understand where you're coming from." But Harry had already taken the bait. His jaw tightened. "There's a clear difference between responsible journalism and the tabloid sensationalism that has plagued my family for decades." Denise pounced. "Tabloid sensationalism? That's quite a statement. Are you suggesting that any coverage not glowing about you is automatically sensationalism?" "That's not what I said," Harry shot back, a little too sharply. "I think most reasonable people can see the difference between fair reporting and deliberate character assassination." The words hung in the air. The studio audience, usually lively, fell silent. Cameras zoomed closer. Nadia, sensing the tension, attempted levity. "Well, this is certainly a spicier Tuesday than our usual debate about pineapple on pizza." The laugh line landed weakly. Denise wasn't smiling. "Character assassination?" she pressed, leaning forward. "That's a very serious allegation. So when journalists report on your actions, your words, your choices, you're saying that's assassination?" Harry shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now. His media training urged him to regain composure, but Denise had him cornered. "I'm saying there's a pattern of coverage that goes beyond legitimate criticism," he answered stiffly. "A pattern," Denise repeated, like a prosecutor smelling blood. "And who decides what's legitimate criticism? You?" The silence that followed was electric. Harry tried to summon his charm again, but the warmth was gone from his smile. He looked less like a confident prince and more like a man realizing he was on hostile ground. "I think anyone with common sense can make that distinction," he said, though the words rang hollow. Denise tilted her head, her smile razor sharp. "Common sense. So by your definition, criticism of you is illegitimate, but your criticisms of others are always valid. Interesting." Christine, desperate to steer things back, gestured with her notes. "Harry, perhaps you could tell us about your latest charitable work. Our viewers would love to hear more about that." But the train had already left the station. Harry's composure was slipping, and the air in the studio had shifted. What was meant to be a friendly daytime segment was becoming a live dissection of royal entitlement. And as Denise Welch leaned back in her chair, eyes gleaming, it was clear to everyone watching. She had no intention of letting him off easy. The atmosphere inside the ITV studios had grown thick, almost oppressive. The air conditioning hummed faintly, but it wasn't enough to cool the rising temperature between Denise Welch and Prince Harry. Viewers at home might have thought this was simply spirited debate, but anyone in the studio could feel it. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a collision. Harry adjusted his posture, straightening in his chair as though sitting taller might restore the balance of power. His voice sharpened. I came here expecting a professional interview, not some kind of ambush. And there it was, the word that would ignite the firestorm. Ambush. Denise's eyebrows shot up. She turned her head slightly toward the audience, then back to Harry, her voice deceptively calm. An ambush, she repeated. Harry, this is a talk show. We ask questions. That's the format. Did no one explain that to you before you agreed to come on? The audience gasped softly, a ripple of murmurs spreading across the studio seats. Christine Lampard, ever the peacekeeper, jumped in quickly. I don't think anyone here is being hostile. Denise is simply direct. Our viewers appreciate honesty. But Harry was already defensive, his jaw clenched, his words spilling out sharper now. These aren't questions. They're accusations dressed up as journalism. Denise leaned forward, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. Accusations? I've asked you about your own statements, words you've spoken publicly. If being asked to explain those makes you feel attacked, maybe the problem isn't with the questions, it's with the answers. The studio fell into pin-drop silence. Nadia avoided eye contact, pretending to shuffle her cue cards. Kay Adams folded her hands, watching carefully, ready to step in if things completely unraveled. Harry's face flushed crimson. His voice carried that unmistakable royal cadence, the tone of someone used to being heard without challenge. I think the viewers at home can see exactly what's happening here. This is precisely the kind of media behavior I've been speaking about for years. Denise let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Media behavior? Harry, you're sitting on a comfy sofa on a daytime talk show being asked about your own words. If that feels like a hostile environment to you, I dread to think how you'd define real hardship. A few people in the audience clapped, hesitantly at first, then louder. Harry's eyes darted toward them, his expression hardening as though he couldn't quite believe the public wasn't automatically on his side. Christine tried again, desperation creeping into her voice. Why don't we shift gears for a moment? Harry, could you share some of the positive work you're doing with your foundation? That's something our audience would love to hear about, but the chance to pivot was already gone. Harry wasn't letting go of the word that had been thrown like a match into dry grass. Hostile, he repeated, his tone cold. This is a hostile environment disguised as an interview. The murmurs in the studio grew louder now. Denise narrowed her eyes, her arms folding across her chest. Hostile environment? Harry, you came here voluntarily. Nobody dragged you in. Nobody forced you to answer. What's hostile is the way you bristle the moment someone doesn't hand you softballs. Harry snapped back instantly, his voice rising. I will not sit here and be spoken to like this. This is entertainment at my expense, nothing more. The words rang out like an accusation. For a split second, even the cameras seemed to hesitate, their whirring quieter, as though the machines themselves recognized the gravity of what had just been said. Denise's expression hardened. Her voice dropped lower, more dangerous with every syllable. Entertainment at your expense? No, Harry. You chose to come here. You chose to sit in that chair. You chose to speak publicly about your family, your country, your grievances. All I've done is ask you to explain yourself. If that feels like a circus, perhaps the clown act isn't on this side of the table. The audience gasped, some clapping instinctively at the sheer bluntness of the remark. Nadia buried her face in her hands. Kay muttered under her breath, "Oh dear Lord." Harry's voice cracked with indignation. "How dare you?" And in that moment, the mask slipped completely. The polished, media-trained prince was gone. What remained was a man, visibly rattled, glaring at a host who had no intention of bowing to his status. Denise didn't blink. She simply leaned back, calm, collected, and utterly unshaken. How dare I? No, Harry. The real question is, how dare you come on this show expecting royal treatment and then throw a tantrum when you don't get it? The silence that followed was suffocating. The battle lines had been drawn, and the audience knew this was no longer just a tense interview. This was a showdown, and Prince Harry was losing. The studio felt like it was holding its breath, Even the panelists, usually lively, chatty, ready with jokes, had gone quiet, their eyes flicking between Harry and Denise like spectators at a heavyweight match. Harry leaned forward now, his voice dripping with anger that barely masked his pride. I came here in good faith, Denise, but it's clear you had an agenda from the start. There it was, the word that set the room alight, agenda. Denise tilted her head, her expression turning almost icy. An agenda? She repeated slowly, savoring the word. Harry, let me get this straight. You think I've ambushed you, created a hostile environment, and now I'm running some sort of vendetta against you? For ratings? The air in the studio seemed to crackle. Christine Lampard winced, scribbling nervously on her notepad, as though looking busy might make her invisible. Nadia avoided eye contact entirely. Staring at the desk in front of her, Kay Adams shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the production booth where no one was coming to save them. Harry's face flushed, but instead of retreating, he doubled down. I think it's obvious what's happening here. This isn't journalism. It's entertainment at my expense. That was it, the line that would echo across social media before the show even ended. Denise sat back, arms crossed, her voice cutting like a scalpel. Entertainment at your expense? You came here voluntarily. Nobody forced you to sit in that chair. Nobody forced you to give interviews where you accuse your own family and institutions of terrible things. And nobody is forcing you to melt down now because I asked you to explain your own words. The audience gasped, some even clapping. A few laughed nervously. The clash had crossed into territory no one expected, and Denise wasn't backing down. Harry's voice cracked with fury. Spoiled child? How dare you speak to me like that? The words reverberated, raw and sharp. And in that moment, the fragile royal facade shattered completely. Gone was the polished prince, the global figure polished by PR handlers. In his place stood a man bristling with entitlement, cornered and losing control in front of millions. Denise's smile was pure ice. How dare I? Harry, you've accused me of ambush, of hostility, of manipulating you for ratings. And now you're lecturing me on how I'm allowed to speak to you on my show. Who exactly do you think you are? The audience broke into scattered applause. Harry stood his ground, his voice booming louder now, shaking with anger. I know exactly who I am, and I know I don't have to tolerate this kind of treatment from anyone. But his words didn't land with authority. They landed with the petulance of a man unaccustomed to pushback. Denise leaned in, her tone dripping with disdain. Treatment? This is a talk show. You're being asked questions. If answering them feels like punishment to you, maybe that says more about you than it does about me. Christine tried once more to intervene, her voice almost pleading. Maybe we should take a moment here, reset things before they get out of hand. But it was far too late. Harry slammed his hand lightly against the armrest, his voice cracking under the weight of his indignation. I have been subjected to character assassination on live television. And you think I'm overreacting? The words character assassination echoed in the studio like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the air. The tension was unbearable now. Even Nadia, who usually found humor in anything, sat frozen, her face pale. Denise didn't flinch. Her reply was measured, deliberate, and lethal. Character assassination? Harry, I asked you 3 questions about your own public statements. That's not assassination. That's accountability. The applause this time was louder. Denise's supporters in the audience had found their voices, emboldened by her unwavering stance. Harry shook his head, his face red with anger. This is a disgrace. You're twisting my words, manipulating me, trying to humiliate me in front of your viewers. Denise leaned forward again, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. No, Harry, you've done that all by yourself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every eye in the room was locked on Harry, waiting to see if he would recover, if he would regain even a shred of composure. But the prince sat there, breathing heavily, glaring at Denise with open fury. And the audience, the panelists, even the cameras knew. This was no longer just a difficult interview. It was a complete unraveling. Live on daytime TV. The studio air felt electric. as though one wrong word might ignite it completely. Prince Harry sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on Denise Welch with unfiltered fury. His voice, when it came, was louder than before, trembling with indignation. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who clearly has an agenda." The words exploded across the set. The audience gasped, and the other panelists froze in their seats. Christine Lampard fidgeted with her papers. Nadia Sawalha leaned back like she wanted to disappear, and Kay Adams looked toward the control booth with silent desperation. But the producers weren't stepping in. They knew they had television gold on their hands. Denise didn't blink. Her voice was quiet, almost too quiet, and that made it all the more dangerous. "An agenda," she repeated. "What agenda would that be, Harry? Asking you to explain your own words? Expecting you to answer like every other guest on this show?" Harry's face flushed darker. "The agenda of making me look bad to boost your ratings." That accusation hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, nobody moved. Even the audience seemed stunned into silence. Then Denise leaned forward, eyes locked on him, and delivered her rebuttal like a scalpel. "Making you look bad? Harry, I didn't put words in your mouth. I didn't script your answers. All I've done is ask you to clarify the things you have said publicly. If you don't like how you come across, perhaps the problem isn't with the questions, it's with the answers." The audience broke into applause, some even cheering. The energy in the room shifted. Harry was no longer the guest of honor. He was the man on trial. Harry slammed his palm against the armrest of his chair. "This is unacceptable. I will not tolerate this kind of treatment." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying his fraying composure. Denise leaned back, arms crossed, her expression equal parts amused and exasperated. "Treatment? Harry, you're sitting in a comfortable chair on a talk show, answering questions about things you've said in front of millions before. If that feels like mistreatment, then perhaps you've lived too long in a world where nobody dares to challenge you." That was the breaking point. Harry pushed himself up from his chair, the legs scraping loudly against the studio floor. The sound echoed through the silent room like a gavel. His face burned red as he adjusted his jacket, glaring down at Denise. "I don't have to listen to this," he snapped. "I'm leaving." The audience gasped again. This was the dramatic exit, the power move, the reclaiming of control that he seemed to think would shift the momentum back in his favor. But Denise didn't rise, didn't flinch, didn't even raise her voice. She simply gestured casually toward the studio door. "There's the exit, Harry. You're free to leave whenever you like." The audience erupted, half in laughter, half in applause. The dramatic gesture had backfired spectacularly. Instead of looking dignified, Harry looked exactly as Denise had accused him of being, a spoiled child storming off when things didn't go his way. Christine tried desperately to patch the unraveling. "Harry, please, why don't you sit back down? We can start fresh, turn this into a more positive conversation." But Harry was too far gone. "Start fresh?" he barked, his voice cracking. "After being insulted, humiliated, and ambushed on live television? Absolutely not." Kay Adams finally spoke, her tone calm, firm. "Harry, I think you're overreacting. No one here is trying to humiliate you." "Overreacting?" Harry turned on her, his voice climbing an octave. "I've just been subjected to a character assassination in front of a live audience, and you dare say I'm overreacting?" The word assassination hit the air like dynamite. The audience gasped. Nadia's jaw dropped. Christine buried her face in her notes. Denise stood now, matching his energy but not his anger. Her voice was steady, absolute, final. "Right, that's enough. This interview is over." The words cut like steel. The audience roared with applause. Harry blinked, stunned. He hadn't expected to be dismissed. "You're throwing me off the show?" he asked, his voice smaller now, uncertain. Denise's eyes never left his. "I'm ending a conversation that stopped being productive the moment you decided accountability was beneath you. If you don't want to answer questions, then you don't belong in that chair." For the first time, Harry looked genuinely shaken. He glanced toward the audience, then the panelists, then the cameras, as if anyone might step in to save him. But no one moved. The reality hit him like a weight. He had lost. And Denise Welch, unflinching, had won. The studio was electric. Half the audience on their feet cheering, the other half frozen in disbelief. Prince Harry stood stiffly beside his chair, red-faced, fists clenched at his sides. The dramatic exit he had envisioned, the one where everyone begged him to stay, had not materialized. Instead, he was being dismissed. "You can't just end an interview because you don't like what I'm saying," he snapped, his voice brittle, almost breaking. Denise Welch, still standing now, didn't even blink. "I'm ending an interview because it stopped being an interview the moment you turned it into a tantrum. Nobody here silenced you, Harry. We gave you the floor, and you chose to use it to play the victim." The audience erupted in applause, the sound ricocheting around the studio. Harry flinched. For the first time it was clear. The room was not with him. "This will be all over the papers tomorrow," he shot back, desperation creeping into his voice. "Everyone will see how unfairly I've been treated." Denise tilted her head, smiling coldly. "Yes, they will, and they'll see exactly what happened here. You were asked fair questions, and instead of answering them, you melted down on live television." The camera caught Harry's face in close-up, his jaw trembling, his nostrils flaring, the weight of humiliation heavy on his features. He looked less like a prince and more like a schoolboy scolded in front of the class. Christine Lampard, her voice soft, tried one final olive branch. "Harry, why don't you take a seat? We can reset and—" But Harry was already shaking his head, the words spilling out fast, furious. "Reset? After this circus? After being insulted and attacked? Absolutely not," Nadia muttered under her breath, loud enough for her mic to catch it. "Oh, for goodness sake." The audience laughed, the tension breaking for a split second. Harry's head snapped toward her, his glare sharp enough to cut glass. But he didn't reply. Denise's patience was gone. Her voice rang through the studio like a judge's verdict. "Enough. Harry, this isn't your palace, and you don't get to dictate the rules here. You've accused me of ambush, hostility, manipulation, and agendas, all because I dared to ask you questions. You've made your position clear. Now so will I. This interview is over. Please leave the set." The audience roared, clapping and cheering as if they'd just witnessed a knockout punch. Harry's chest rose and fell sharply as he tried to salvage the moment. "You'll regret this," he muttered, his voice low but caught by the microphone. "This is exactly why people hate the media." Denise's reply was calm, precise, devastating. "No, Harry, this is why people are tired of privilege masquerading as persecution." The words landed like a final blow. Harry froze, lips parting as if to reply. But nothing came. His voice was gone. His power gone. His control of the narrative shattered. With stiff shoulders, he turned sharply toward the exit. The cameras followed as he walked off set, his entourage scrambling to keep up. The heavy studio doors swung shut behind him with a thud that echoed through the stunned silence he left behind. For a beat, nobody moved. Then Denise exhaled, smoothed her notes, and sat back down as if nothing monumental had just occurred. "Well," she said dryly, her voice cutting through the air, "that was lively." The audience burst into laughter, applause, even whistles. Christine shook her head with a nervous smile. Nadia threw her hands in the air dramatically, and Case sighed, muttering, "Television history, right there." And she wasn't wrong. By the time the show ended, clips of the meltdown were already circulating online. Twitter was ablaze. Headlines screamed across social media. "Prince Harry storms off loose women after explosive clash with Denise Welch." Memes multiplied, hashtags trended, and comment sections overflowed with disbelief, mockery, and applause. Some sided with Harry, calling it unfair treatment, but the overwhelming chorus of voices sided with Denise. Viewers praised her for holding him accountable, for refusing to bend, for stripping away the royal veneer to reveal what lay beneath. In a single morning, a routine daytime talk show had delivered one of the most explosive celebrity confrontations of the decade. And when the dust settled, one truth was undeniable. Prince Harry had lost the battle for control. He had walked onto the loose women set expecting to shape the narrative. Instead, he walked off humiliated, defeated, and exposed. As the credits rolled, Denise Welch leaned into the camera with a small, knowing smile. "Stay tuned. We'll be back after the break. And just like that, television history was made.